Hello everyone, and welcome to Crime Whisper. I'm here to guide you through another chilling true crime story tonight. I know many of you use these episodes to relax and fall asleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it for you? Now, get comfortable, settle in, let your thoughts slow down, and when you're ready, let's begin. Case 1. The tragic story of Laura Ackerson was born on April 30th, 1984, to Roger and Brenda Ackerson. From the very beginning, Laura radiated warmth and joy. She was the kind of child who lit up a room, a gentle, bright spirit who brought smiles wherever she went. She spent her early years attending Grace Fellowship Church with her family, and even then, people noticed her kind heart and sunny disposition. But beneath the surface of that picture-perfect life, cracks were beginning to form. In 1996, when Laura was just 12 years old, her parents' marriage fell apart. The divorce was bitter and emotionally scarring. Her world shifted overnight, and the trauma of that separation would stay with her for years. After the split, Laura moved with her mother to Iowa, hoping for a fresh start. Later, she followed her creative instincts and pursued graphic design at Kirkwood Community College. Art came naturally to her coliform, and storytelling through visuals seemed to be written into her DNA. But Laura was still searching for something deeper, a place to call home, a community where she belonged. Eventually, that search led her to Kingston, North Carolina. She enrolled in a real estate program and landed a job in marketing and design. In nearby Raleigh, she finally began to form real friendships, a stability she hadn't known in childhood. And then, in March of 2007, everything changed. While dining at a local restaurant, Laura met a man named Grant Hayes. They hit it off immediately. Strangely enough, they even shared the same birthday, Pro 30th, which felt like fate. Grant was charismatic, with a musical flair and a religious upbringing. He played gigs in local bars and had a magnetic charm that drew people in. But Hayes also carried demons that weren't immediately visible. Years earlier, he had married a woman named Emily after high school. That relationship burned out quickly, and the divorce took a toll on him. He spiraled into a deep depression and was eventually diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Though prescribed medication like lithium, Grant chose to self-medicate instead with alcohol and synthetic drugs that made his behavior increasingly erratic. He began suffering from paranoid delusions. He believed aliens were controlling the government. He thought he was a chosen survivor of the apocalypse, destined to be rescued by a spaceship. He rejected modern medicine, including vaccines, convinced they were poison. Despite all of this, on the surface, Grant seemed to be doing fine. He was performing music regularly and maintaining a facade of normalcy. That's when he and Laura started dating. To outsiders, he looked like an up-and-coming artist, but behind closed doors, the reality was much darker. Their relationship quickly turned toxic. Grant was emotionally and physically abusive, deeply controlling, and relentlessly unfaithful. Laura, still healing from her childhood and longing for love and safety, found herself trapped. He isolated her from her friends, dictated her schedule, and chipped away at her confidence. Shockingly, they married only a few months after meeting. Laura, desperate for a stable family, believed she had finally found her fairy tale ending, but her friends were stunned. Most hadn't even known she was in a relationship, let alone married. Still, they supported her. Soon after, Laura became pregnant. She was overjoyed. She imagined motherhood would be a new beginning, chance to pour all her love into something pure. Grant, however, wasn't nearly as enthusiastic. The pregnancy made him even more controlling, more unstable. When their son, Grant Jr., was born, Laura adored him. Naming the baby after himself felt like a typical move from Grant, more about ego than sentiment. But for Laura, her son was everything. He became her reason to endure. and soon, he would be the reason she tried to escape. Meanwhile, Grant Hayes was spiraling. He continued chasing music gigs, cheating openly, and self-medicating with drugs, showing little to no interest in fatherhood. His role as a father existed in name only. Eventually, he accepted a job opportunity in the Virgin Islands. He didn't hesitate. He packed up and left, abandoning Laura and their newborn son in North Carolina. Whether he ever actually worked out there remains unclear, but one thing was certain: he wasn't alone. During his time in the Virgin Islands, Grant met Amanda Perry Tucker, a single mother, an aspiring actress. Amanda had landed a few minor, uncredited roles in shows like The Sopranos and The Stepford Wives, but her acting career hadn't taken off. What did catch Grant's attention, though, was Amanda's financial situation. She reportedly had nearly $200,000 in cash and $80,000 worth of jewelry, possibly from a divorce settlement, although that's never been confirmed. At the time, Grant was financially drained. He had no savings, no stability, but Amanda had resources. To him, she was an opportunity. Their relationship moved quickly. For Grant, being with Amanda wasn't just about romance, it was about power and leverage. He paraded the affair, making no effort to conceal it from Laura. In fact, he used Amanda as a weapon, taunting Laura, trying to break her down. But Laura did something Grant never expected. She stood up for herself. After years of manipulation, betrayal, and emotional abuse, Laura made the decision to leave him for good. Surprisingly, even people close to Grant supported her. His own family, and even his ex-wife Emily, encouraged Laura to walk away. They knew firsthand how toxic Grant could be. But just as Laura started to rebuild, she discovered she was pregnant. Again, despite everything, she gave Grant another chance, though. At this point, it was probably the 10th one. It spoke volumes about Laura's love for her children. She was willing to endure more pain in the hope of giving them a stable family. Perhaps it was a reflection of her own unresolved trauma from her parents' divorce. She packed her things and moved to the Virgin Islands with her son, Grant Jr., hoping that being closer might help mend things. But to Grant, her arrival wasn't a loving gesture, it was an inconvenience. She disrupted the life he was building with Amanda. Eventually, Laura gave birth to her second son. Sadly, the baby had serious health problems, and the family needed better medical care. So they returned to North Carolina. Grant was livid. He blamed Lauren, the children, for forcing him to leave what he saw as golden opportunities in the Virgin Islands. Meanwhile, Amanda had relocated to New York and encouraged Grant to come pursue work in the entertainment industry. But Grant didn't go to New York for work. He went to be with Amanda. He loved it, there free from responsibilities, close to Amanda, and surrounded by distractions. Eventually, he reached out to Laura with a seemingly innocent request. Could he take Grant Jr. to a photo shoot for a diaper modeling job? He promised to return him quickly. Laura hesitated, but she agreed. She wanted her sons to have a relationship with their father despite all the history. What she didn't know was that Grant had a very different plan. When he didn't return, their son Laura grew frantic. She turned to Facebook for clues, and what she found shattered her. Grant had secretly married Amanda in New York. He was now living there full-time with Amanda and Grant Jr. Laura was heartbroken, and the nightmare was just beginning. When she called Grant to confront him, he dropped another bombshell, one that turned her world upside down. According to him, their marriage had never been legal. Laura checked the marriage certificate, and there it was. Grant had never signed it. Legally, they had never been husband and wife. Then came the most devastating blow. Grant and Amanda had filed for emergency custody of Grant Jr. and won, because there was no official custody agreement, and because Laura was between jobs and living in temporary housing. The court sided with Grant. He claimed she was unfit to parent. Laura never even got the chance to present her side. She immediately returned to court. this time armed with documentation, text messages, records of abuse, and evidence of Grant's unstable mental state. The judge ordered psychological evaluations for both parents. In the meantime, Laura was granted weekend visits and daily phone calls with her sons, but even that was made unbearable. Grant and Amanda, who was now pregnant with his child, did everything they could to block Laura's access. They interrupted calls, delayed handoffs, and manipulated every possible moment. Still, Laura held on. Eventually, the results of Grant's psychological evaluation came back and they were damning. The report noted that he had no meaningful, emotional bond with his children. The boys were visibly more relaxed and happier with Laura. Laura, by contrast, was described as a deeply nurturing and committed mother, someone who placed her children's needs above all else. The court took it seriously. They ordered further evaluations of Grant and adjusted the custody arrangement. Around that same time, Amanda gave birth to a baby girl, Lillian, on June 9, 2011. Eventually, the court issued a new custody ruling, a rotating schedule. 3 days with one parent, 2 with the other, back and forth. It was an uneasy compromise, but it was a step toward justice. But beneath the surface, something was unraveling. Grant's behavior was growing more volatile, his anger more unpredictable. And then, on July 13, 2011, everything changed. Laura had plans to meet her friend and business partner Siobhan later that evening, but she never arrived, and she never called. At first, no one panicked. Laura had mentioned earlier. That day she was going to pick up her boys from Grant. Her last known communication was a text to him, "On my way." He never responded. Days passed. No messages. No sightings. No contact. On July 18th, 5 days after she vanished, 27-year-old Laura Ackerson was officially reported missing. Police acted quickly. They searched her apartment. Everything was in place. No signs of a break-in. Nothing looked disturbed. Surveillance footage showed her leaving the building, but she never returned. Next stop, Grant and Amanda's apartment. Armed with a warrant, officers entered. The couple wasn't home, but the scene inside raised every red flag imaginable. The scent alone told them something was terribly wrong. The moment investigators entered Grant and Amanda's apartment, they were hit with a powerful, unmistakable smell. Bleach. The space had been scrubbed from top to bottom, suspiciously spotless. But to trained eyes, it was anything but clean. A number of household items were conspicuously missing: rugs, a vacuum cleaner, even the shower curtain. Certain spots on the floor had been aggressively scoured, the discoloration evidence of harsh chemical use. But what disturbed investigators the most were 2 pieces of paper left behind. The first was a handwritten song draft titled "Man Killer." The lyrics were darkerly descriptive, detailing the murder of a woman strangled to death. The second paper claimed to be a legal agreement, a document supposedly signed by Laura, stating that she was surrendering custody of her children to Grant for $25,000. Anyone who knew Laura would have immediately called it a lie. Her children were her world. She would never have agreed to something like that. Not for money, not for anything. Investigators believed the document was a forgery, a crude attempt to manipulate legal custody. They knew time was running out. Surveillance footage helped piece together a timeline. After July 13th, Amanda was seen with the children at a local Chick-fil-A. Grant, meanwhile, was spotted in the early hours of July 14th shopping at both Walmart and Target in Raleigh. His purchases were deeply unsettling: bleach, trash bags, duct tape, goggles, a reciprocating saw and blades, and a lint roller. That same day, Amanda made a strange call to her daughter, asking her to watch the kids for most of the day. Then, on July 16th, Grant made another chilling amounts of ice in several coolers. Shortly after, he rented a U-Haul trailer. He, Amanda, and the children set out for Richmond, Texas, where Amanda's sister, Karen Berry, lived. But the stops didn't end there. Once in Texas, Grant went to a local Home Depot and purchased more supplies, heavy-duty gloves, and 8 bottles of acid. By this point, Texas authorities had joined the investigation. When they spoke with Karen Berry, what she told them only deepened the alarm. On the night of July 19th, Grant and Amanda had borrowed a boat. They said they wanted to go out on Oyster Creek, a remote, swampy canal known for murky water, thick vegetation, and alligators. Karen recalled them asking strange, unnerving questions. Do alligators eat people? Could wild hogs consume flesh? Were there sharks in Texas waters? At the time, she dismissed it as weird curiosity, but to investigators, it was clear Grant and Amanda had been scouting a body dump site. Authorities launched a search of Oyster Creek. Hours passed as teams navigated the dangerous waters, thick with reeds and lily pads, and then the horror revealed itself. They found remains. It was Laura. Her body had been dismembered and so badly mutilated that determining an exact cause of death was difficult. But forensic experts concluded she had likely been strangled or suffered a powerful, fatal blow to the neck. The evidence was overwhelming. The bleach-drenched apartment, the forged custody letter, the grotesque purchases, the lyrics to Man Killer, the remains in Oyster Creek. It wasn't a spontaneous act. It was planned, cold, calculated. Laura Ackerson had been lured, trapped, and murdered. Later, her car, a white 2006 Ford Focus, was found. The interior had been carefully cleaned, but signs of damage were visible, especially in the rear of the vehicle. Surveillance footage from near Karen Berry's home showed Amanda discarding bottles of acid 13 days after Laura was last seen alive. The case took a decisive turn. On July 25, 2011, Grant Hayes and Amanda Perry Tucker were arrested at Grant's parents' house in North Carolina. Both were charged in connection with Laura's murder. Their trials were held separately, and, as expected, each pointed the finger at the other. Grant claimed Laura came to the apartment on July 13th and threatened Amanda, supposedly saying she'd take Amanda's daughter, just as her own sons had been taken from her. According to Grant, Amanda snapped, killed Laura, and he only helped cover it up. Amanda painted herself as the victim. She described Grant as abusive and manipulative. She said Laura and Grant got into a heated fight, and that Laura accidentally hit her head. Amanda claimed she didn't see the incident because she was in another room with the kids. She said Grant told her Laura was injured, asked her to leave with the children, and when she returned later, Laura was gone. He allegedly told her that Laura had left. It wasn't until they were in Texas. Amanda claimed that Grant confessed, and by then, she said, it was too late. He had threatened her into silence. But the evidence said otherwise. Neither of them showed remorse. Neither of them told the truth. On September 16, 2013, Grant Hayes was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His behavior in court was chilling. He smiled, laughed, and appeared eerily at ease, as if he were heading off on vacation, not receiving punishment for a brutal murder. Amanda's sentencing followed months later. On February 19, 2014, she was given a prison term of 13 to 16 years. The judge didn't hold back. He stated clearly that Amanda had a choice and she chose to participate. She could have stopped it, but she didn't, though she expressed remorse. Many in the courtroom wondered whether it was real or just another act. But Amanda's punishment wasn't over. Texas authorities charged her separately with tampering with evidence, adding another 20 years to her sentence. As for what truly happened that night, investigators believe Laura was lured under false pretenses. Perhaps Grant told her she could see her boys, maybe even take them home. He might have said he was ready to give her custody. It's the only reason she would have traveled all the way from Kinston to Raleigh alone. Friends had warned her. never go to Grant's without backup. But Laura was a mother, hopeful, vulnerable. She likely walked into that apartment, believing peace was finally possible. Instead, she walked into a trap. One theory suggests Grant and Amanda forced her to sign the fake custody agreement under threat. When she resisted, they killed her hand, then began their gruesome plan to dispose of her body. Host gentle close. Laura Ackerson was just 27 years old. She was a devoted mother, a talented artist, and a woman trying to build a better life, despite unimaginable pain. Her story is not only a heartbreaking example of intimate partner violence, but also a sobering reminder of how dangerous manipulation and control can become. To honor her, we remember her not by the cruelty of her ending, but by the warmth, the love, and the quiet strength she gave to her children. Right until the very end, rest peacefully. Laura Ackerson likely tried to comply to protect her children, to survive, but then she was attacked. Investigators believe she was either strangled or struck with a fatal blow to the neck. It was cold, calculated, unspeakably cruel. Why? Because Grant Hayes wanted her gone out of his life, out of the custody battle, out of the picture entirely. He wanted freedom. A clean slate with Amanda. No more court hearings. No more shared parenting. But here's the tragic irony. Just a year later, in October 2014, Grant and Amanda divorced. Everything he did, the manipulation, the lies, the violence, the destruction, it all led to nothing. He destroyed a woman's life, shattered his children's future, and ruined his own. For what? Today, Laura's two sons, along with Amanda's daughter Lillian, are in the care of Grant's parents. Thankfully, they are loving and nurturing everything. Grant was not. But still, it's heartbreaking to imagine the childhood those boys lost, growing up without their mother because of their father's cruelty. Laura Ackerson was a vibrant, creative, and deeply loving woman, a devoted mother, a loyal friend, a daughter who deserved so much more. Her death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a manifestation of control, manipulation, and violence at its worst. Her story is a powerful reminder of the importance of recognizing red flags, knowing your worth, setting boundaries, and walking away from those who mean you harm no matter how much love you think you can offer. Laura didn't get the fresh start she hoped for, but maybe, just maybe, her story will help someone else find the strength to choose themselves before it's too late. Case 2. The abduction of Abby Hernandez was a crisp October afternoon in Conway, New Hampshire. The trees were changing color. The air held that familiar autumn chill, and 14-year-old Abby Hernandez had just finished her school day. She was only 3 days away from her 15th birthday and wearing her brand new black-heeled boots, a gift from her mom, as she walked home, texting her boyfriend, Jimmy. Nothing seemed unusual. It was a walk she'd done many times before, familiar, safe. But then, a car pulled up beside her, and in a flash, Abby was gone. No one knew where she went, or what had happened to her. Abby Hernandez, just Abby, to those who loved her, was born on October 12, 1998, in Manchester, New Hampshire. Her parents, Xenia and Ruben, were overjoyed to welcome her into the world from a young age. Abby was full of life, energetic, bright, and down-to-earth. She proudly called herself a tomboy and embraced the label with a smile. She loved sports, classic rock, and had a personal style that reflected her laid-back, confident attitude. At the time of her disappearance, Abby was dating a boy named Jimmy Campbell. Everyone around them could see how much they adored each other. Their relationship felt real, full of kindness and genuine affection. Life hadn't been perfect for Abby, though when she was still a child, her parents divorced. After that, her mom Xenia raised Abby and her older sister Sarah on her own. Even with this change, Abby remained upbeat. She never let life's challenges weigh her down. Friends and teachers knew her as someone who always found the silver lining. But everything changed on October 9th, 2013. That morning was like any other. Abby, dressed in a gray sweatshirt, black yoga pants, and those new birthday boots. It was the first time she'd worn them, and they were already giving her blisters. Her best friend Miranda noticed her limping around school, wincing with every step. Still, Abby made it through the day, chatting with friends, taking photos, laughing like usual. That afternoon, she didn't take the bus home. Sometimes she liked to walk, especially if the weather was nice. It wasn't far, and she didn't mind the quiet. Back home, Xenia expected her daughter to walk through the door, as usual. But Abby didn't arrive at first. Xenia wasn't alarmed. Maybe Abby had taken a detour. Maybe she was with a friend. But as the hours ticked by and the sky darkened, worry crept in. She called Abby's phone. No answer. Panic bloomed. Xenia rushed to the school and asked staff if anyone had seen her daughter. The librarian told her that Abby had left school hours earlier on foot, just like any other day. By 7 p.m., Xenia reported Abby missing. The police responded immediately. Conway was a small, tight-knit town. News of Abby's disappearance spread fast. Investigators pulled security footage from the school. It showed Abby leaving the building at exactly 2:29 p.m., backpack on, heading toward home. Nothing looked out of place. No signs of distress. No indication she was planning to run away. Back at home, her room was untouched. Her belongings were all there. She hadn't packed anything. Her phone, wallet, and favorite things were all still with her when she vanished. The investigators did what they always do. They asked the hard questions. Had Abby been acting strangely? Was she upset about something? Could she have been hiding a plan to leave? Every person who knew her, friends, teachers, family, gave the same answer. Absolutely not. Abby had been excited about her upcoming birthday. She had picked out decorations, planned a party, and had been counting down the days. There was no way she would have just disappeared, with no time to waste. Police launched an urgent search. Volunteers poured in from surrounding areas, helping comb the neighborhood on foot. Helicopters scanned from above. The FBI joined the case early on, bringing even more eyes, experience, and resources. But still, no sign of Abby. Tips began pouring in. Hundreds of them. Investigators worked tirelessly, chasing every lead, reviewing every camera feed, knocking on every door. They held regular press conferences, trying to keep hope alive. A dedicated website, Bring Abby Home, was launched, filled with her photos, videos, and messages from loved ones pleading for her safe return. Then came October 12th, that is 15th birthday. Instead of balloons and cake, her community held a candlelight vigil. Dozens gathered, singing happy birthday through tears, praying she was still alive. Her mother Xenia clung to hope, even as the weight of uncertainty became almost too much to bear. Xenia Hernandez tried to stay strong, just for Abby, but for her older daughter, Sarah. Still, the weight of the unknown was unbearable. Some days, hope flickered so faintly it felt like it might go out altogether. But she held on. Meanwhile, investigators pressed forward. They pulled Abby's phone records. The last signal from her phone had pinged just about a mile from home. Then, silence. The phone went completely dark. Text records didn't point to anything suspicious either. Her last message had been to her boyfriend, Jimmy. He was riding the bus home around the same time Abby vanished. Naturally, police questioned him, but it became clear, very quickly, Jimmy had nothing to do with Abby's disappearance. Their relationship had been real, full of love and affection. Weeks passed. Then, on November 6, 2013, nearly a month after Abby disappeared, Xenia was sorting through her mail when she noticed something unusual: an envelope postmarked October 23rd. That date was exactly 2 weeks after Abby had gone missing. There was something about it, something that felt important. She opened the letter, and as she read, her heart caught in her chest. It was from Abby. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, but the voice, the tone felt strange, off. In the letter, Abby wrote that she was safe, that she loved her family, that she had run away, and that no one should lose hope. Xenia read the letter again and again, but something wasn't right. Yes, it was Abby's handwriting, but it didn't sound like her. The words felt coached, scripted. She turned the letter over to authorities. Investigators were stunned, but not convinced. To them, the message felt too controlled, too carefully written, like someone had told Abby exactly what to say. DNA analysis confirmed the letter had been written by Abby, but detectives were certain she hadn't written it by choice, and they didn't buy the runaway story for a second. Thankfully, they didn't stop investigating. Months passed. The trail had gone cold. Then, on March 17, 2014, nearly 6 months after Abby vanished, something unexpected happened. Roughly 30 miles from Conway, a woman was involved in a minor car accident, a fender bender, but instead of exchanging information, the other driver pulled out a weapon and brutally attacked her. It was a violent, sudden assault. Police arrived quickly and the man was arrested. At first, it seemed like an isolated incident, a random act of road rage, but something about this man, something felt off. Investigators had a gut feeling that he was connected to Abby's case. They weren't ready to say it publicly, but the man raised every red flag. His name was Nathaniel Nate Kibbe, 34 years old, and he was strange, deeply into guns, obsessed with the Constitution, a loner, an intense personality who harbored extremist political views. When investigators searched his home, they confiscated dozens of firearms. He didn't resist, but when they spotted something behind the house, a large shipping container, Nate became defensive. He told them flatly that the warrant only covered weapons, not the rest of the property. Legally, they had to respect that, so they left, unaware that inside that container was Abby. Yes, Nate Kibbe was her kidnapper, but how did he manage to take her in the first place? Let's go back to the day she disappeared. Abby had just missed her school bus by seconds. Her new birthday boots were causing her pain, and she was limping as she walked. With no other option, she started the short walk home. While texting Jimmy, a car pulled up beside her. A man in his 30s noticed her limp and offered her a ride. Tired and sore, Abby accepted. She had no idea that one small decision would lead to months of captivity, but instead of driving her home, the man veered off into an empty parking lot. That's when everything changed. Abby tried to get out, but he pulled a gun. He tied her hands, blindfolded her, and forced her to crouch down in the footwell of the passenger seat, completely hidden from view. After a long, disorienting drive, the car stopped. He dragged her out and threw her onto something soft. When the blindfold came off, she realized she was lying on a filthy mattress, inside a metal shipping container, her prison. The container was cold, dark, and padded from the inside to muffle sound. It had locks on the outside. There were no windows, no daylight, no escape, and standing above her was her kidnapper, wearing a gold Halloween mask. From the beginning, Nate made his intentions clear. If she screamed, if she tried to escape, there would be consequences. And almost immediately, the nightmare began. Despite locking her away, Nate kept Abby tied up for days at a time. He used devices, stun guns, shock collars to hurt her. There was no reason other than his own twisted sense of control, and tragically, Abby was repeatedly assaulted, but she refused to give up. Somewhere deep within her, a flame kept burning, a quiet, relentless desire to survive, to make it home, to see her family again. In those early weeks, when Abby's family was on TV, begging for her return, Nate would force her to watch. He would stand over her and taunt her. "Look how close they are," he'd say. "They're trying so hard, but you're still here, still mine." It was psychological warfare, cruel and calculated. But instead of breaking Abby's spirit, it strengthened her resolve. She saw her mother crying, her friends hoping, and she made a decision. She would survive. 2 weeks after her abduction, Nate forced her to write a letter to her mother. Yes, the same one Xenia received in November. But what Nate didn't know was that Abby had tried to embed a secret message in that letter. She scratched the words help and kidnap into the paper using her fingernails. But Nate noticed. He made her rewrite the letter this time, cleaner, without any hidden messages. That's the version he mailed. Still, the abuse continued. But at around the 6-month mark, something shifted. Abby realized she had a small measure of influence over Nate. She noticed that when she stayed calm, when she acted friendly, he lowered his guard, so she began talking to him, asking him questions, making conversation. Slowly, Nate developed a twisted emotional attachment to her, one Abby quietly used to her advantage. He began referring to her as the closest thing he'd ever had to a daughter. He'd talk for hours about his life, about conspiracy theories, about the Constitution. He even began letting her read books. Eventually, he removed her blindfold. Abby saw his face, and she remembered it. For the first time in 9 agonizing months, Abby could see his face, and it was through one of Nate's many long-winded monologues. This time about food and the government. Abby found something that would change everything. Inside one of the books Nate had let her write a simple, well-worn cookbook was a name written in permanent marker on the inside cover. Nate, that was it. No last name, but it was a start. Abby had finally learned her captor's real name. From that point forward, she began collecting every detail she could. Nate admired the Gadsden flag. He held fiercely libertarian views and often rambled about political conspiracies like he was hosting a one-man seminar. Abby listened patiently. Every word, every slip, every clue she filed it all away. She also learned that Nate had another secret. He printed counterfeit money. He considered it an act of rebellion, a personal vendetta against a government he despised. And in a calculated move to gain more of his trust, Abby offered to help him. It was never about supporting him. It was about surviving. The more useful she seemed, the less likely he was to hurt her. Gradually, though never completely, the abuse began to lessen. But Nate's crimes didn't stop with Abby. Around this time, he began hiring sex workers and paying them with the same fake money. He was exploiting them and scamming them. One of those women was 27-year-old Lauren Monday, the day after she met Nate. Lauren tried to spend the money he'd given her only to discover it was counterfeit. Furious, she called him and threatened to go to the police. Nate had been careful. He never gave Lauren his real name. But he made one critical mistake. The email address he used included his full name, and Lauren remembered the car he drove. That changed everything. Soon after her call, Nate burst into the container in a panic. His energy was chaotic, unsettled, but Abby had learned by now when he spiraled, the safest thing to do was stay calm. She'll let him talk. Then, out of nowhere, he handed her a plastic bag with her clothes inside. "I need to get you out of here," he said. Abby's heart pounded. What did that mean? Was he planning to kill her? Move her somewhere else? She didn't. No. He put her in the car and drove for what felt like hours. Abby watched the road, the signs, the sky, and then familiarity, recognition. He was taking her back to the same place where he'd abducted her. He pulled over, told her to get out, and just like that, he drove away. Abby stood frozen in the spot where it all began. It didn't feel real. A part of her wanted to cry, to scream, to collapse in relief. But another part was still gripped by fear. What if he came back? Still wearing the same clothes from the day she was taken, Abby started walking. And finally, after 9 long months, she reached her front door. Inside, Xenia was sitting in the living room, weighed down by the grief she carried every single day since her daughter vanished. And then, Abby's voice, a soft, trembling mom. Xenia froze. At first, she thought her mind was playing tricks on her. But when she turned around, there Abby stood, alive. Everything stopped. In an instant, the nightmare lifted off only for a moment. The daughter she prayed for, searched for, cried for, was finally home. But the danger hadn't disappeared. Nate was still out there. And before he let her go, he made one final, chilling threat. If you talk to anyone, I'll come for you. I'll come for your family. Abby was terrified, and her instinct after everything was to protect the people she loved, even if that meant staying silent. Because of that silence, rumors spread. Some people in the community, the same ones who had once rallied to support her family, began to doubt her. Some even accused her of making it all up. It was heartbreaking, but with time and with support from law enforcement, Abby found the strength to tell the truth. She spoke openly about the shipping container, the golden Halloween mask, the abuse, and the man behind it all, Nathaniel Kibbe. He was arrested in 2014. The case took years to build. More than 200 charges were filed against him, including kidnapping, sexual assault, and producing counterfeit currency. And when it finally went to trial, the verdict was clear. Guilty. Kibbe was sentenced to 45 to 90 years in prison. Then, on May 16, 2016, in a packed courtroom, Abby Hernandez walked in. She stood tall, strong, steady, and she delivered a powerful message. She forgave him, not for him but for herself. She said clearly that she refused to carry the weight of his cruelty for the rest of her life. That moment wasn't just a formality. It was a declaration of strength, a quiet act of reclamation. Abby explained how the experience had changed her. She now treasured small things: sunsets, quiet mornings, the sound of laughter, freedom. The trauma she endured had shifted her view of the world, but it never broke her spirit. Today, Abby lives a peaceful life. She's a hairdresser, a devoted mother. Her days are filled with love, with meaning, and with healing. What she endured is almost unimaginable. But her story isn't just about survival. It's about resilience. In the face of terror, she held on, for herself, for her mother, for her future. Abby Hernandez is a fighter, and her courage reminds us all, even when the odds seem impossible, even when the light seems gone, we can still survive, we can still hold on, and we can still rise. Soft transition music. Fade into the next case. Host low. Reflective. Case 3. It was the afternoon of October 8th, 2011, in the outskirts of Cordoba, Spain. Thick black smoke rose quietly from a private property. A fire had been lit in a concealed corner of the estate, one that burned hotter than expected. That same day, a distressed father called emergency services in a panic. His 2 young children, he said, had vanished while playing in a nearby park. Family, neighbors, and police all joined the search. Hope filled the air. But behind that desperate phone call was a horrifying secret, one that would soon grip an entire nation. His name was Jose Breton. As the days passed, Jose Breton's behavior became increasingly unstable. He was in constant contact with his therapist, growing more desperate with each call. New medications were prescribed. None of them seemed to help. Meanwhile, Ruth, determined to rebuild her life, relocated to Huelva with their 2 children and took refuge in her mother's home. The custody agreement was simple. Jose would have the children every other weekend. And it was during one of those weekends that everything changed. On October 8th, 2011, Jose placed a call to emergency services. He claimed his children's 6-year-old, Ruth, and 2-year-old Jose Jr. had vanished while playing at a local park in Cordoba. According to him, they'd simply run off. He looked away for a moment, and when he turned back, they were gone. Authorities responded immediately. An extensive search was launched. Police officers, emergency units, even local taxi drivers joined in. Posters bearing the children's faces were distributed across the city. At first, the possibility of a kidnapping was considered, but as the hours ticked by, inconsistencies began to emerge. For one, Jose didn't file an official police report until 9 p.m. several hours after the children had supposedly disappeared. The delay raised red flags. Then came his statement at the police station. Jose suggested that perhaps someone from Ruth's family had taken the children. He implied that ongoing tensions from the divorce might be to blame, but that theory quickly unraveled. At the time of the children's disappearance, Ruth and her relatives were all in Huelva from Cordoba. When Ruth heard the news, her heart sank. Something didn't feel right. She immediately traveled back to Cordoba and organized a vigil, joined by neighbors, family, and concerned citizens, desperate to bring her children home. As the investigation progressed, police began to zero in on Jose himself. His emotional detachment, history of controlling behavior, and past instability painted a troubling picture. And then, his story began to shift at first. He claimed the children had wandered off while walking with him. Later, he changed his version now, saying they'd arrived by car, and that he was distracted by a text message when they disappeared. He also told investigators that earlier that same day, he had taken the children to visit his sister, before heading to his secluded property on the outskirts of Cordoba. He claimed they arrived there at 1:15 p.m., according to Jose. The children had fallen asleep in the car. While they slept, he said, he lit a bonfire to burn old possessions that had belonged to Ruth and Echt. He described as symbolic, a way of letting go. Later, around 5 p.m., he claimed he drove to the park to meet his brother and nephews, leaving the children in the car the entire time. Nothing about this timeline made sense. The inconsistencies were glaring. Investigators suspected he was hiding something and decided to inspect the rural property that very night. Jose accompanied them. There, police found the bonfire Jose had mentioned still faintly smoldering, the embers glowing in the dark. They also searched his vehicle and discovered troubling items, a pair of sharp kitchen knives and a roll of duct tape. Jose casually brushed it off, saying they were just leftovers from his move out of the family home. But his detached demeanor, so cold, so flat, didn't sit right. The next morning, detectives pressed further. They pulled surveillance footage from roads near Jose's house and the park. The cameras captured his car, but not the children. Eyewitnesses at the park confirmed the same thing. They saw Jose alone that afternoon. Police returned to the rural property for a more thorough inspection of the fire pit. Now extinguished, the site revealed something chilling beneath the ashes. Investigators found a rectangular structure designed to contain and intensify heat and a metal table turned upside down, likely to serve as a makeshift grate. Mixed within the charred remains were tiny bone fragments. A forensic team was immediately called in, but Jose remained calm. He claimed he had only burned Ruth's personal items, books, clothes, even preserved animals from her veterinary school. Days stood still. Investigators informed Ruth of what they had found. A forensic anthropologist would analyze the fragments. The initial results were confusing and devastating. The bones were classified as non-human belonging, supposedly too small. Animals, mostly rodents and carnivores. But police didn't buy it. They still believed Jose was lying, and he certainly wasn't behaving like a grieving father. The bonfire now became the centerpiece of the investigation. Forensic experts determined it had been fueled with gasoline and more than 600 pounds of firewood, far more than needed to burn a few personal belongings. Neighbors reported seeing the smoke as early as 3 p.m., thick and black, visible from miles away. Jose had said the fire was small, but the science and the eyewitness accounts told a very different story. The horror became harder to ignore. Police now suspected the children's bodies had been incinerated in the fire. An excavation began, but unfortunately, the digging process destroyed much of the original fire site. wiping out potentially vital forensic evidence. Pressure mounted, but Jose remained silent. On October 12, 2011, he was arrested and charged with the unlawful detention of his children and fabricating a crime. Still, there were no body, no definitive proof. Investigators pressed on. They brought in ground-penetrating radar, mapped the property, and divided the terrain into grids, determined to examine every inch. Cadaver dogs joined the effort. Wells, rivers, and nearby quarries were searched. Helicopters and dive teams combed the region. Nothing as weeks turned into months. Authorities reviewed Jose's mobile data, checking every location he'd visited. Still, they found no new leads. By the end of 2011, not a single piece of conclusive evidence had surfaced. And then, in early 2012, the search was suspended. Police now believed the children had never made it to the park at all. The case took a darker turn when Jose attempted to take his own life in prison. His injuries were minor, and he was quickly transferred to the infirmary. Public opinion remained divided. While many were certain he had harmed his children, some members of his family insisted he was innocent, that someone else must have taken. Then, in August 2012, nearly a year after the children disappeared, Ruth's family requested a second forensic analysis of the bones found in the bonfire. The results changed everything. This time, the examination was carried out by a different expert hand. What they found was shocking. The bone fragments were not animal remains. They were human, and they belonged to two children between the ages of 2 and 6. A devastating confirmation. The truth had been missed for nearly a year. An uproar followed. Public trust in the initial forensic analysis was shattered. To eliminate any doubt, a third analysis was conducted, this time by a Universal-led forensic team in Madrid. Their conclusion matched the second. The remains did belong to Ruth and Jose Jr. Their lives had been taken, and their bodies burned, destroyed beyond recognition. And Jose Breton, he had engineered the entire thing. The final forensic report was undeniable. The remains recovered from Jose Breton's bonfire were human, and they belonged to two small children. Despite the defense team's attempt to question the chain of custody and suggest possible tampering, authorities stood firmly behind the integrity of the investigation. The bones had been processed by official forensic labs, and the findings were devastatingly clear, and Jose Jr. had died, and their bodies had been deliberately incinerated. Experts studying the ashes noted the arrangement of the fragments, details that indicated how the bodies had been positioned within the fire. While it was impossible to determine with certainty whether the children had been alive when the fire was lit, the evidence pointed to a controlled, purposeful cremation for Ruth. The discovery was crushing, but it also offered something she hadn't had in nearly a year: answers. In September 2012, with mounting forensic evidence and new expert testimony, a judge formally charged Jose Breton with 2 counts of aggravated murder, including the aggravating factor of kinship, killing his own children. As he awaited trial, Jose underwent psychological evaluations. The findings were clear. While he displayed traits of narcissistic and antisocial personality disorders, he was not mentally ill. He had been fully aware of his actions. Even then, Jose refused to confess. Authorities concluded that the motive behind the murders was a calculated, cold act of revenge, a twisted punishment directed at Ruth for leaving him. According to investigators, the plan had been carefully orchestrated. Between September 29th and October 7th, Jose acquired sedatives under the pretense of needing anxiety medication. These drugs, authorities believed, were used to render the children unconscious, or possibly even to kill them before they were placed in the fire. In the days leading up to the crime, Jose purchased large quantities of firewood and gasoline from a nearby station. He fabricated an alibi, telling family members that he would be spending the day at the park with the kids, and in an eerie detail he even rehearsed. At one point, he left his sister's children briefly unattended, observing their behavior on unsettling test for what he would later do to his own. On the evening of October 7th, Jose picked up Ruth and Jose Jr., spending the night at his parents' home. The next morning, he drove them to his house. Before the trip, he had allegedly administered sedatives. Once at the property, he lit a massive bonfire. Beneath a metal table, he placed his children's bodies, doused the pile in gasoline, and set it ablaze. The flames, fed by fuel and dry wood, burned intensely for hours. Afterward, he calmly drove toward the city park. There, he called his brother and mother, pretending to be with the kids. He reinforced his fabricated story that the children had gone missing from the park. He urged his family to join the search and later contacted emergency services. The entire story was a lie. Jose filed a false police report, knowing all along that his children were gone because he had taken them. The trial began on June 17, 2013. From the start, Jose's demeanor was chilling, rigid posture, unblinking gaze, disturbingly calm. Witnesses took the stand, including both Ruth and Jose. He denied all accusations, claiming he adored his children and would have given his life for them. He shifted blame onto the police, accusing them of focusing on him instead of searching for the real culprits. "It's unbelievable," he said, "that we still don't know where my kids are." But Ruth, through tears, told the court the truth. She spoke of years of manipulation, abuse, and emotional trauma. She described Jose's obsessive behavior, his rigid control over their lives, and his disturbing treatment of their children. One moment stood out. She recalled Jose slapping their son in public, prompting her to finally confront him. The courtroom heard testimony from forensic officers, who confirmed that the evidence had been preserved correctly. Experts backed the theory that the bones had been human and belonged to children, consistent in age with Ruth and Jose Jr. But perhaps the most damning testimony came from Ruth's cousin. He told the court that Jose had confessed privately once, but 3 separate times, saying, "You'll never find them alive. They're dead." Despite Jose's continued claims of innocence, the prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. This had not been a moment of madness. This had been planned, calculated, and cruel. On July 12, 2013, after 3 days of deliberation, the jury reached a unanimous verdict. Guilty of murdering both of his children, Jose remained expressionless as the verdict was read. On July 22nd, the court sentenced him to 20 years in prison for each murder, plus additional time for filing a false report. In March 2014, his legal team filed an appeal, claiming violations of due process and the presumption of innocence. The Spanish Supreme Court, however, upheld the 40-year sentence. Then, in 2015, the Provincial Court of Cordoba slightly reduced the sentence to 25 years, taking into account legal technicalities. The decision sparked controversy across Spain. In October 2016, the case returned to headlines when Jose reportedly attempted suicide in prison. However, his lawyer later claimed he had likely been assaulted by another inmate. He was hospitalized for several weeks before returning to prison, where he still received visits from his mother, who remained steadfast in her belief that he was innocent. Under Spanish law, inmates can request temporary release after serving 1/4 of their sentence. That milestone came around 2019, but Jose's request was denied. Officials cited his lack of remorse, his refusal to acknowledge guilt, and his failure to offer any apology or restitution. Then, in 2021, something changed. During a restorative justice therapy session, Jose allegedly confessed. In a group setting with fellow inmates, many also convicted murderers, he finally admitted what he'd done. He was in prison because he had killed his children. And in March 2025, the case was thrust back into the spotlight. A Spanish newspaper published excerpts from a forthcoming book based on 60 letters and interviews Jose had given since 2016. In these writings, he admitted everything. He described the planning, the execution, and the aftermath. He even offered a written apology to Ruth, saying he didn't have the courage to face her in person, but he acknowledged her pain and the horror of what he'd done. For Ruth, the apology came far too late. She had spent years honoring her children's memory, advocating for victims of domestic violence and speaking out against emotional abuse. While the confession confirmed everything investigators had believed from the beginning, many questioned whether it should carry any legal weight, given the brutality of the crime and Jose's continued lack of empathy throughout the investigation and trial. The public overwhelmingly opposes any possibility of sentence reduction or early release. For Ruth and her family, the grief remains. The crime may be solved, the man may be behind bars, but the loss is forever. And with the release of Jose's confessions, the wound has been reopened. Some scars never fade. It was 2 a.m. when Sasha Samsudian returned to her apartment in downtown Orlando. She was alone, tired, and ready to end what had been a fun night out. Security cameras captured her walking into Uptown Place Apartments, located at 911 North Orange Avenue. Less than 24 hours later, police would walk through that same front door, and what they discovered inside shocked everyone, because behind the locked door of Unit 345 was a brutal scene. And the person responsible was someone no one would have ever suspected. Narrator reflective tone. At just 27 years old, Sasha Samsudian had built an enviable life. She worked as a social media manager for a local real estate agency in Orlando, a job she not only loved, but excelled in. Those who knew her described her as magnetic, bright, vibrant, and full of life. She worked hard, celebrated often, and lit up every room she walked into. Sasha had recently moved into Uptown Place Apartments, a new chapter in her life, and things were going well. Personally and professionally, Sasha was thriving. Narrator tense tone. Police entered Sasha's apartment, and at first, nothing seemed amiss. The living room was in order. No signs of forced entry, but in the bedroom, everything changed. Sasha's lifeless body was found partially covered by a duvet, her hand visible at the edge of the bed. She had been raped, beaten, and strangled. Her body showed defensive wounds. Her clothes were torn. Her necklace was tangled in her hair. The scent of bleach hung thick in the air. Police noted bleach stains on the bedding. The cleaning supply cabinet was left wide open. Nearby, they found a condom wrapper and a single shoe print. One detail stood out. The toilet seat was up. Odd, since Sasha lived alone. Investigators lifted fingerprints from the underside of the lid, and DNA was collected from Sasha's body. The medical examiner would later call the trauma to her neck unlike anything he'd ever seen. Narrator, quiet and thoughtful. Sasha had graduated from Seminole High School in Sanford. The community was heartbroken. The case gained traction quickly, with police urging anyone who had seen Sasha that night or early Saturday morning to come forward. Security footage from Uptown Place showed Sasha entering the building shortly before 2 a.m. She seemed slightly disoriented. She didn't have her key fob and was let in by another resident. The security guard on duty that night was Stephen Duxbury. Duxbury told police he had seen Sasha trying to get into her unit. She said she might have left her keys in her car and asked if he could walk with her. But after stepping outside, she turned back, claiming she remembered her door code. According to Duxbury, she re-entered the building alone. It would be the last time anyone saw her alive. Later, Duxbury revised his story. He now said he had seen Sasha again, this time with an unfamiliar man. That detail raised serious alarm. Narrator investigative tone. Detectives retraced Sasha's steps from the nightclub to her apartment. Security footage showed her walking downtown, dressed in white jeans and a purple top. Street cameras picked up images of her with 2 other women. Police issued a press release asking the women to come forward, and they did. They told police that Sasha had seemed intoxicated, disoriented, and unable to find her phone or ID. Concerned for her safety, they invited her to share their Uber. But as the car reached a red light near Uptown Place, Sasha suddenly recognized the building and jumped out. The women followed, trying to ensure she got inside safely. She couldn't access the building on her own. That's when they encountered Duxbury, the security guard. He refused to let Sasha in without ID, but as they stood outside, another resident opened the door. Sasha slipped in. The women waited briefly, then left out. So far, every account aligned, but there was more to uncover. Inside Sasha's apartment, police found her iPad synced to her iPhone. This allowed them to retrieve her messages from the night she died. The final message, sent at 5:12 a.m., simply said, "Ben." Narrator measured tone. Ben had been someone Sasha was casually seeing. He told investigators they had been texting earlier that evening and were possibly going to meet up that weekend. He provided a DNA sample and his alibi was airtight. Another man named Taylor, former boyfriend, was also interviewed. He'd been working his shift at a bar the night of Sasha's murder. Witnesses confirmed it. His DNA didn't match either. Days later, Sasha's family held a private funeral, one that honored her diverse cultural roots with a blend of Hindu, Islamic, and Christian traditions. Friends and co-workers filled the room, many only then realizing just how many lives Sasha had touched. Narrator voice dropped slightly, more serious. Then came the break. Police finally gained access to the off-site surveillance footage from Uptown Place. At 1:46 a.m., Sasha is seen entering the building right behind her. A man briefly checks on her, then disappears from view. A few minutes later, Sasha appears again, climbing the stairs. She's alone. Then, at 2:06 a.m., she's seen running up another flight of stairs with Stephen Duxbury right behind her. This aligned with his story about walking her to the garage to check for keys. But something felt off. Detectives continued combing through the footage. At 6:36 a.m., Duxbury is seen exiting the second floor, carrying 2 large black trash bags. He walks toward the parking garage. A couple of minutes later, he returns empty-handed. He finally leaves the premises at 6:39 a.m. Well, after his shift was supposed to end, was taking out trash part of his job? No. According to building management at WASN, single quotes, T, worse. The bags he was carrying matched the kind found in Sasha's apartment. Narrator low, intense. Investigators obtained a search warrant for Duxbury's home and called him in for a polygraph test. That's when his story began to fall apart. He denied ever entering Sasha's apartment, but the polygraph indicated deception. His responses spiked again when questioned about Sasha's cause of death. The examiner asked, was she poisoned, stabbed, strangled? Duxbury denied them all, but at the word strangled, his vitals surged. There was no way he could have known Sasha had been strangled, unless he had been their narrator, concluding tone. What had once looked like a helpful security guard assisting a resident, now looked like a calculated predator. Police arrested Stephen Duxbury and charged him with first-degree murder, sexual battery, and burglary. DNA evidence from Sasha's body confirmed the match as the truth came to light. The betrayal was profound, not just for Sasha's family and friends, but for the entire community. She had been targeted in what should have been her safest space, her home, by the very person entrusted with protecting the building. The case against Duxbury was airtight. He was eventually convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Narrator. Soft, reflective. Sasha Samsudian's story is a painful reminder of how quickly joy can turn to tragedy, and how predators can hide in plain sight. She was bright, she was loved, she was going places, and while her life was stolen far too soon, the courage of her friends, the determination of her family, and the relentless pursuit of justice by investigators ensured that the man responsible was held accountable. Music fades out slowly, though polygraph results aren't admissible in court. The inconsistencies in Stephen Duxbury's statements gave investigators the push they needed at his home. Detectives found a pair of shoes that matched the footprint left in Sasha Samsudian's bedroom. Forensics soon confirmed that the fingerprint found on the underside of her toilet seat belonged to Duxbury. Even more damning was the DNA recovered from Sasha's body, including samples from her chest. All of it matched him, but the most chilling discovery came from his phone. At approximately 5 a.m. on the morning of Sasha's murder, just minutes before she sent her final one-word text to her ex, Ben Duxbury searched the internet for one disturbing phrase: how to override a quickset keypad lock. It was the exact kind of lock installed on Sasha's apartment door, adding to the mounting evidence. Duxbury bore visible injuries, scratches, and even a bite mark on his arm, classic signs of a struggle. For detectives, the story was coming into focus. The man responsible for securing the building had become its greatest threat. Narrator, grave tone. On October 21st, 2015, just days after Sasha's murder, Stephen Duxbury was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, sexual battery, burglary. Investigators believe he took advantage of Sasha's impaired state, followed her into her apartment, and brutally attacked her. After sexually assaulting and strangling her, he tried to clean up the crime scene with her own household products. Surveillance cameras captured him later carrying 2 large trash bags out of the building, bags believed to contain items he removed from her apartment. Narrator measured. 2 years later, in November 2017, Duxbury stood trial. His defense worked aggressively to have evidence suppressed. They claimed his polygraph statements were made under pressure, that he feared losing his security license. They also tried to exclude the shoes found at his home and recordings of his interviews, but the judge ruled otherwise. The evidence, including the shoes and polygraph responses, would be admitted. Legal experts emphasized the importance of this decision. In a circumstantial case, every piece of the puzzle counts, and the prosecution had assembled a devastating picture. DNA from Sasha's body, matching shoe print, internet searches timed to the attack, surveillance footage of Duxbury with the trash bags, a timeline that collapsed under scrutiny. The defense tried to raise doubts. Why weren't Duxbury's clothes tested? They questioned why Sasha's bedroom shoe print was a size 9 when Duxbury wore a 10.5, and they emphasized that no footage showed him actually entering her apartment. But prosecutors reminded the jury, this case was built on science, not speculation. The forensic evidence didn't just implicate Duxbury, it placed him inside Sasha's apartment. One of the most harrowing pieces of testimony came from the medical examiner. The abrasions on Sasha's lower body, he said, could have been caused by a security or utility belt, like the kind Duxbury wore. In a desperate final attempt, the defense floated a theory. What if Sasha and Duxbury had consensual sex, and someone else committed the murder afterward? But the prosecution didn't flinch. Her body doesn't lie, the attorney told the jury. The crime scene doesn't lie. Narrator solemn. The trial lasted just 7 days. After only 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned their verdict: guilty. Stephen Duxbury was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder of Sasha Samsudian. He also received 15 additional years for attempted sexual battery and burglary with assault. The judge ordered the sentences to run consecutively. When given the chance to speak, Duxbury said nothing. In a moment of quiet strength, Sasha's parents turned to acknowledge Duxbury's mother, who had sat silently in the courtroom throughout. They recognized that she, too, was suffering. But the pain they carried was immense. Sasha's mother expressed it plainly. There will be no wedding day to plan, no birthdays to celebrate. Every time I go to a wedding, she said, I remember that we'll never have that for our daughter. Narrator with conviction. The family's fight didn't end in the courtroom. The Samsudians filed a civil lawsuit against Uptown Place, the security firm Vital Security, and Spectrum Brands, the manufacturer of the keypad lock. Their 102-page complaint alleged that repeated warnings about Duxbury's behavior had been ignored and that the lock he bypassed was dangerously flawed. Their attorney argued the lock could be defeated with something as simple as a screwdriver. In fact, similar models had failed in other cases, but the defense pushed back, claiming the lock had since been discarded by the unit's new tenant, so no testing could be done. Narrator, contemplative. In February 2019, Duxbury filed an appeal, challenging the court's refusal to suppress his statements and seeking to overturn his conviction. That appeal was denied, though the legal process was over. The grief never truly faded. Ken and Tara Samsudian turned their pain into purpose. Tara, once a trauma nurse, stepped away from her job. Instead, she dedicated herself to victim advocacy, supporting other families, sharing Sasha's story, and helping lead events like the annual Victims' Rights Breakfast in Orange County. Narrator, quietly emotional. Sasha Samsudian was more than just a headline, more than just a victim. She was a bright, compassionate, and magnetic young woman whose warmth impacted everyone she met. She was a beautiful soul, one coworker said. She laughed easily, loved deeply, and lived fully. Her family and friends continue to honor her memory not only through their grief, but through action, advocacy, and love. Was he just an arrogant, man-skilled, and overconfident who failed to save his wife? Or was he something far darker? In the case of Gabe Watson, two versions of the truth collided. After pushing for Tina to change her life insurance policy just days before their honeymoon, Gabe took her diving off the coast of Australia. According to him, Tina panicked underwater and accidentally knocked off his mask and air supply as he tried to help. When he regained visibility, she had sunk too deep. A rescued diver found her lifeless body resting at the bottom of the ocean, but Gabe's story never quite added up. He had claimed to be an experienced rescue diver with over 55 logged dives, so why couldn't he save his new bride? And why did he change his story 16 times? While many suspected murder, Gabe was ultimately convicted only of manslaughter and received a 4.5-year sentence. Worse yet, for Tina's grieving family, that sentence was later reduced to just 18 months. Gabe Watson walked free. Narrator, dark, quiet tone. And then there's the man in the yellow sweater, captured in what, at first glance, looks like an ordinary family photo. He's smiling, holding a newborn baby, but the truth behind that picture is horrifying. In 1985, a serial killer claimed the lives of at least 10 women across 2 states. Among them was Lisa Stasi, a 19-year-old mother whose body was never found. Her 4-month-old daughter, Tiffany, also disappeared. 15 years later, in 2000, Kansas police arrested a man named John Edward Robinson for theft and assault. When they searched his property, they discovered the remains of 2 missing women in barrels on his farm. Then came the full confession. John was the serial killer responsible for a string of murders stretching back to 1984. And yes, he was the man in that photo. The baby he held, Tiffany, after murdering Lisa, John gave her infant daughter to his own brother and sister-in-law who desperately wanted a child. They renamed her Heather Robinson and raised her as their own. They had no idea that John was a murderer. To them, he was just Uncle John. In 2019, at the age of 34, Heather gave an emotional interview. She revealed that at age 15, her world was turned upside down. That's when she learned that her beloved uncle had murdered her real mother, and that she had been living a lie ever since. John Edward Robinson now serves life without parole in a Kansas prison. Narrator, haunting tone, from lies to tragedy. Some mysteries remain unsolved. In April 2014, 2 young women from the Netherlands, Creemers and Lausanne, set off for what should have been a peaceful hike near the Bar volcano in Panama. Accompanied by a small dog, they planned to explore, enjoy nature, and soon begin volunteering with local school children, but they never returned. That evening, only the dog came back. Their host was alarmed and organized a search. As the hours turned into days, and days into weeks, panic set in. Police, helicopters, dogs, and volunteers scoured the jungle, but nothing was found until June 14th, 2.5 months later. A local woman found a blue backpack washed up on a riverbank hours from the trail. Inside were shocking clues: passports, brass, glasses, a water bottle, $83 in cash, and, most importantly, Lizanne's camera and both girls' phones. From the data recovered, a timeline emerged. Over 4 days, the girls had attempted 77 emergency calls. Only one briefly connected for 2 seconds. Then, on April 6th, someone unsuccessfully tried to unlock Chris's phone multiple times, raising suspicions that someone else may have been using it. By April 11th, both phones had died. Then came the photos. Early images showed the girls smiling on a remote jungle trail, but what followed were 90-night photos, taken between 1 o'clock and 4 a.m. on April 8th. Some showed their belongings arranged on rocks. Others were total darkness, only distant flashes. One photo seemed to show blood on the back of Chris's head. Later, searchers found Chris's clothing neatly folded by the river. Then came a grisly discovery: a pelvic bone and a foot in a boot. The bones told different stories. Lizanne showed signs of natural decomposition, but Chris's were bleached white, leading investigators to wonder whether something or someone interfered. Despite years of searching, no one knows exactly what happened to Chris and Lizanne. Their deaths remain one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries in modern history. Narrator soft, tense. If the Dutch hikers left behind haunting images, this next case left behind something even more chilling: the victim's final moments, captured by the killer himself. It was October 27th, 1958, when motorists spotted a disturbing scene on a California highway. A woman was pointing a gun at a man with large ears, shouting for him to stay put. Police quickly arrived. Then what they uncovered shocked the nation. The man, Harvey Glatman, claimed to be a photographer, but he was, in truth, a serial killer, obsessed with beautiful women. The woman holding the gun was his fourth intended victim and the only one to escape. Inside Glatman's car, police found ropes, a gun, and a camera. Witnesses later linked him to several missing models. Under interrogation, Glatman cracked. He confessed to murdering 3 women and led investigators to the remains. Inside his apartment, police discovered a toolbox. Inside the toolbox, dozens of photographs. But these weren't ordinary portraits. They were death photos. Among them were disturbing images of Judy Dull, a 19-year-old model with striking beauty. In the photos, Judy is bound, gagged, her eyes filled with terror. Some images show her nude and tied to a wooden post. The final photos showed Judy in the Mojave Desert, where Glatman later strangled her with a rope, left her body behind, and walked away. Narrator closing note. Each of these stories is disturbing in its own right, full of unanswered questions, stolen lives, and terrifying truths. From a husband who let his wife drown, to a serial killer holding a stolen child. From mysterious jungle disappearances to horror caught on film, these cases force us to confront what humanity is capable of. Justice doesn't always arrive in time, but the truth, haunting as it is, endures. After Judy Dull's final moments were captured on camera, Harvey Glatman, the man behind the lens, calmly returned home, leaving her body in the desert, exposed to the elements. The photos he had taken, trophies of a murderer's satisfaction, documented her final breaths. Judy's disappearance triggered a police investigation, but with no solid leads, Glatman was free to continue his killing spree. He would go on to murder 2 more models before his 4th intended victim managed to escape and brought his dark secrets crashing into the light. Authorities brought Glatman back to the desert where he had left the bodies. Most remains had been ravaged by animals, leaving only bone fragments. But even those were enough for forensic experts to confirm the identities of Judy Dull, Shirley Bridgeford, and Ruth Mercado. During interrogation, Harvey revealed the disturbing truth. He was consumed by an obsession and infatuation with women bound by ropes. The press dubbed him the Glamour Girl Slayer, and his crimes shocked the entire nation. Digging deeper, investigators learned that Glatman had a criminal history. He had been arrested twice for sexually harassing women, yet after short stints in prison, he only sank deeper into his violent fantasies. Glatman confessed to everything and pleaded for the death penalty. The court granted his wish. On September 18, 1959, Harvey Glatman was executed. His reign of terror finally ended. Narrator: this is the last known photo of Abigail Williams, taken along the Monon High Bridge Trail in Carroll County, Indiana. Just minutes later, Abigail and her best friend, Liberty German, vanished. It was February 13, 2017. The two 8th grade girls had set out on a hike, something they'd done before. They were supposed to meet Liberty's father at a pickup point, but he waited and waited. They never arrived. That night, panic set in. Their families reported them missing, and an urgent search was launched. The next day, on Valentine's Day, their bodies were found, the community shattered by grief and fear. From Liberty's phone, police recovered a grainy video clip showing a man in jeans, a dark blue jacket, and a hat approaching the girls on the trail. His face was hard to make out, but the chilling audio of him saying, "Guys, down the hill," haunted everyone who heard it. Years passed. Rumors swirled. Tips came and went. Then in October 2022, a break. Police arrested Richard Matthew Allen, and 2 years later, in November 2024, he was sentenced to 130 years in prison for the murders of Abigail Williams and Liberty German. Narrator: not all chilling images are evidence of crimes some remain unexplained, lingering in the realm of the paranormal. In 1943, in the small Hungarian village of Kapis George, a man snapped a photo of his wife. It seemed ordinary until someone noticed a small girl standing behind her, wearing a dress, but with no face and no hands. The photo was never altered or edited. Decades later, it still sparks debate. Was it a glitch of light, or something otherworldly? In Chicago, Illinois, another photo stunned its owners. A young couple had just moved into a new apartment and were celebrating their first day with a picture. But when they developed the film, they noticed something disturbing. In the window behind them sat the figure of an old woman with a dog, though they insisted they had been completely alone at the time. Then there's the infamous Cooper family photo from the 1950s. It shows 2 women and 2 boys, smiling. But what caught the world's attention was the image of a man's body seemingly falling from the ceiling. No one could explain how it appeared. In 1945, Australian woman Mary Elizabeth visited the cemetery to tend to her 17-year-old daughter's grave. She snapped a commemorative photo, but when it was developed, there appeared to be a baby sitting on the grave, staring directly into the camera. Mary swore no child had been there. From a ghostly figure with glowing eyes in the back seat of a car, to a mysterious priestly spirit appearing behind a woman praying in a church. Each image tells a story. Some comfort, others disturb. Even a vacation photo of a child in England, taken in a desolate marsh, seemed innocent, until her parents saw the ghostly figure of a man standing behind her. Though they had seen no one that day. In Manila, a Nokia 7250 captured a photo of 2 girls posing on the street. But when examined closely, it appeared a ghostly hand was gripping one of the girls' arms. A woman named Jackie Ram, visiting Six Flags amusement park in foggy weather, took a photo she'd never forget. Clear in the frame was a boy in a red sweater and white collared shirt, though no such child was there when the picture was taken. Narrator: somber tone. Now, we return to Florida, where another real-life mystery unfolded. It was supposed to be a regular night out. Tracy Ocasio, 27, headed to her favorite bar, the Florida Tap Room in Okahaitu, watch an Orlando Magic playoff game. She was bright, full of dreams, and always in touch with her loved ones. That night, she promised her mom she'd head straight home after the game, but she never returned. The next day, her car was found abandoned on a dark, quiet street. Her phone had been turned off. Tracy had vanished. Born in 1982, Tracy was the pride and joy of her parents, Liz and Joseph Ocasio, a daddy's girl. She loved animals, dreamed of her career in radiology, and had an eclectic personality, raising everything from lizards to a cat named Cookie. She was passionate about history and loved crafting handmade jewelry in her spare time. After a broken engagement, she moved back home where she was welcomed with open arms. Life was steady, happy, and full of promise. The night of May 26, 2009, was supposed to be like any other. Tracy planned to watch the game with her father, but when work delayed him, she went to the bar alone. It was a familiar place, full of familiar faces, but after the final buzzer, something changed. She never came home. Her phone went silent. Ours turned into a full day. Her family knew something was wrong. Tracy never missed a call. What happened after the game? Who did she leave with? And why, after all these years, has she never been found? Just like that, Tracy Ocasio was gone. When she didn't return home after a night out, her parents reported her missing immediately. The search began with urgency. Investigators started at the last place she was seen, the Florida Tap Room. Surveillance footage provided their first big lead. Tracy was captured on camera around 1 o'clock to 1:30 a.m., leaving the bar. She wasn't alone. With her was a bald man, close to her age. They appeared relaxed, chatting casually, walking out together. Tracy looked alert and left willingly, but neither her mother, Liz, nor her father, Joseph, recognized the man. Tracy had been wearing black jeans, a tank top, a hooded jacket, and a green and white hat that night. But there was no sign of distress, no indication of danger. Investigators knew they needed to find the man. Then, the next clues surfaced. On the evening of May 27th, Tracy's yellow 2002 two-door Chevrolet Cobalt was found abandoned on Franklin Street in Ocoee, dark, desolate area with no street lights or foot traffic. It looked completely deserted. The car was unlocked, with no personal items inside. No purse, no phone, nothing. Both front seats were reclined forward, as if someone had recently accessed the back seat or helped someone in or out. That raised alarms. Tracy rarely used the back seat, especially in a compact two-door car. Even more troubling, Tracy hated dark places. Her father was adamant she would never have parked there, voluntarily. Then came the breakthrough. The man seen on surveillance was identified as James Hathaway. Detectives located him quickly. Surprisingly, James agreed to speak. He told investigators he had met Tracy at the bar. They watched the game together, and afterward he asked for a ride home since he didn't have a car. According to him, Tracy dropped him off and drove away. But something didn't add up. Tracy's car had been found only a few yards from James's house, where he lived with his father. Her car abandoned was practically on his doorstep. That wasn't a coincidence. Investigators pulled Tracy's phone records. Her phone had powered off around 8:30 a.m. on May 27th, the morning after the game. The last signal pinged right where her car was found. With that evidence, detectives secured a search warrant for James's home. Inside, they found no trace of Tracy, no clothing, no possessions. But they did find a significant stash of drugs, and James, who was out on bond, was arrested for drug use, and with his arrest came darker revelations. James Hathaway had a criminal history, including previous charges related to juvenile kidnapping. Then 2 witnesses came forward, friends of James, who claimed they saw him leave the bar with a woman matching Tracy's description. One said Tracy had even entered James's home that night. She allegedly refused drugs he offered and then left. That directly contradicted James's version of events, where he claimed she never came inside. Now, not only was he the last person seen with Tracy, but he had lied to investigators. His criminal record, proximity to her abandoned car, and now his conflicting story made him the prime suspect. Even more disturbing, James had a violent past. Nearly a year before Tracy vanished, a woman named Rachel Clark gave him a ride home. As she leaned in for a goodbye hug, James suddenly attacked her, tackling her to the ground and whispering, "Don't make me kill you." She screamed and fought back until a passerby intervened and scared him off. Rachel survived, but was left bruised, traumatized, and unheard. She filed a police report, but James was never charged. He disappeared before police could locate him. That is until Tracy disappeared. Once he was back on the radar, Rachel's case was reopened. Police wanted him off the streets. The search for Tracy continued, and then, almost 2 years later, something unexpected and chilling happened. On February 22, 2011, detectives were conducting a search at Lake Carter, a remote body of water that had mostly dried up. During the search, they found human remains, a skull, part of a spine, and more bones began to emerge as the lake drained. 2 days later, they also discovered a wallet, an ID card, and a cell phone. The name on the ID, Christopher George. This wasn't Tracy. It was someone else entirely, but Chris's story would soon intersect with hers in an unthinkable way. Chris George and Tracy Ocasio didn't know each other, but one man connected them, both James Hathaway. DNA confirmed the remains belonged to Chris. Detectives began to look into possible links between the two cases. Then a tip came in, an anonymous call to Tracy's father. The caller claimed that James had committed 3 murders and that an accomplice, a woman, knew where the bodies and weapons had been dumped. Lakes, just like Lake Carter. Investigators couldn't ignore it. They kept digging into James's past. Witnesses recalled that in early February 2009, just after his assault on Rachel, and before Tracy went missing, Chris George had been seen with James and another man near a wooded area. A patrol officer even stopped them that night. James told the officer that Chris was high and needed help. The officer let them go. Soon after, Chris's vehicle was found abandoned at Lake Carter, the very place where his remains were later discovered. With the identification confirmed, police contacted the George and Ocasio families, though they had never met. Their tragedies were now intertwined, connected by a man with a violent past and a trail of destruction that stretched across years. The tragedy left 2 families devastated, bonded by heartbreak and a shared longing for justice. But justice wouldn't come easily. The autopsy results for Chris George were inconclusive. His remains were too decomposed to determine a definitive cause of death, while James Hathaway's proximity to the scene raised serious red flags. There simply wasn't enough forensic evidence to tie him directly to the crime. Still, investigators refused to give up. They had something solid in Rachel Clark's case, her eyewitness testimony, physical injuries, and a history of violence that painted James in a damning light. At the time, he was already sitting in Seminole County Jail on unrelated charges. But now, prosecutors had what they needed to move forward. In May 2011, the trial for the attempted murder of Rachel Clark began. At its heart was Rachel herself. With courage and clarity, Rachel took the stand. She described the terrifying moment James turned on her, the sudden shift in his demeanor, how he tackled her to the ground, assaulted her, and whispered chilling threats into her ear. She recalled, fighting for her life, her voice breaking at times, but never faltering. Across the courtroom, James Hathaway sat stone-faced, his expression blank as his actions were laid bare. His defense team argued that he had been intoxicated and couldn't recall what happened that night. They suggested it was all a misunderstanding. a regrettable incident caused by alcohol and confusion. But then, the jury was shown photos of Rachel's injuries, her bruised neck, scratched arms, and battered face. The room went silent. There was nothing ambiguous about what she had endured. This wasn't a drunken mistake or a misread signal. It was a violent, calculated attack, and everyone in that courtroom knew it. After deliberating, the jury returned with a guilty verdict: attempted murder, burglary, robbery, and false imprisonment. The judge sentenced James Hathaway to life in prison. As the sentence was read aloud, the courtroom finally exhaled. Then, James stood to speak. He offered what he called an apology. "Her injuries were my fault, and I do apologize for what happened. I know I didn't try to kill her, but I'm sorry for what did occur." But to many, his words felt hollow, empty, as if a simple sorry could somehow erase the trauma he had caused. Rachel had fought for her life. She carried the scars, both physical and emotional. No apology could undo what had been done. As for Tracy Ocasio's case, investigators had to face a painful truth. They might never get justice for her. Everyone close to the case believed James was responsible. But belief isn't enough. Without concrete evidence, they couldn't move forward with charges. He remained the prime suspect. But legally, their hands were tied. After the trial, Tracy's father, Joseph, spoke to the press. "If there's any comfort," he said, "it's that he's behind bars now, and he can't destroy another family like he destroyed ours." But then came a twist no one saw coming. In 2015, James appealed his conviction, claiming his attorneys had pressured him into waiving his right to a speedy trial. Shockingly, his appeal was granted. A new hearing was held, but the outcome didn't change. James Hathaway remained sentenced to life in prison, still behind bars, still suspected in the disappearance of Tracy Ocasio. Now, 15 years have passed since Tracy was last seen leaving the Florida Tap room, a bar she knew well and felt safe in. There have been no phone calls, no sightings, and no answers. Her parents, Joseph and Liz Ocasio, still carry the weight of her absence. They continue to fight, hold vigils, and push for answers. They live with a mix of hope, grief, and uncertainty, often all at once. Joseph, especially, wrestles with guilt. He thinks back to the night Tracy went out alone. He wonders, what if he hadn't had that work errand? What if he'd gone with her? In his heart, he believes he might have been able to stop what happened. But the truth is, this wasn't his fault. No one could have predicted it. The blame lies not with the father, but with the man who took advantage of a moment of trust and turned it into tragedy. And yet, without evidence, justice remains just out of reach. The signs of a struggle were undeniable. Celeste had fought back. Police later estimated the entire attack lasted less than 2 minutes. But Aggie, awakened almost instantly by the sound of shattering glass, had reacted within seconds. The house was small, there wasn't far to run. And yet, by the time she reached Celeste's room, it was already too late. When investigators questioned Aggie about her immediate and haunting accusation, her answer revealed a chilling truth. This wasn't the first time Celeste had warned someone about the man she believed would hurt her. She had reported him before. She had tried to sound the alarm, but no one truly listened until it was too late. As detectives dug deeper into Celeste's life, they discovered a man whose quiet obsession had been festering for over a year. Obsession that would ultimately end in murder. His name was Louis Sacco, a 35-year-old former co-worker who had once worked alongside Celeste at the call center. On the surface, he was just another employee, but underneath, something far more dangerous was building. Louis was born in Iraq in 1984 to Christian parents and was the eldest of 5 siblings. In 1992, the Sacco family immigrated to Australia under a humanitarian visa, hoping for a better life. As a child, Louis was described as quiet, even sweet, though socially isolated. He preferred to stay in his room, away from others. a trait that only deepened with age. By the time he reached college, Lewis had grown reclusive and withdrawn. He'd never had a romantic relationship, and most of his time was spent alone. After graduation, he struggled for years to find stable work until April 2018, when he landed a job at the same call center where Celeste was already thriving as a team leader. At first, they had little to do with each other, but in June 2019, Lewis was let go from the company due to poor performance. On his final day, the person tasked with escorting him out was Celeste. She handled it professionally, offering him a kind goodbye and a handshake. But instead of simply accepting it, Lewis pulled her in and kissed her on the cheek before walking away. That moment unsettled Celeste. Soon after, Lewis began messaging Celeste on Instagram. At first, the tone was romantic. He confessed his love, said he couldn't sleep or eat without thinking of her, and asked if she felt the same. Celeste was polite but firm. She told him she appreciated the kind words but wasn't interested. She wished him well and blocked him, but Lewis wouldn't accept her boundaries. He began creating fake accounts, sending messages that became increasingly disturbing. What started as infatuation turned into obsession, then harassment, and then something even darker. Some of the messages were sexually explicit. One read, "Celeste, if you had my body for a day, what would you do to me?" Terrified, Celeste responded again, this time more firmly. "Please stop contacting me. This is making me very uncomfortable. Respect my wishes." But Lewis didn't stop. He continued to reach out from dozens of new profiles. The messages grew, more erratic and more aggressive. In one final note, he wrote, "My impression of you has changed. You're just like the rest. I'll dedicate every ounce of my energy to proving my worth to the world. That's my promise to you. This is my last message." It wasn't just troubling, it was threatening. After 6 months of relentless torment, Aggie finally convinced Celeste to go to the police. They walked into the station together and told officers everything, how he had harassed her online, followed her, and wouldn't stop contacting her. But instead of protection, they were told there was little police could do, because Lewis hadn't made any direct threats, and because no physical crime had been committed. Officers claimed no laws had been broken. The advice, ignore it, and maybe, the officer suggested, leave social media altogether. There was no formal report. Lewis's name wasn't even written down. No follow-up. No warning issued. Celeste was left to deal with it alone. Over the next 6 months, Lewis's behavior escalated from creepy to dangerous. He parked outside her workplace. He tracked her movements. He sent over 140 messages from different fake accounts, and then he figured out where she lived. He had followed her home. Celeste was now living every stalking victim's worst nightmare. She was terrified. She told co-workers she didn't feel safe anymore. She even said out loud what everyone fears but hopes never comes true. "I don't think I'm going to survive this. I think he's going to kill me." So once again, Celeste and her mother went to the police, this time with hope. And thankfully, this time an officer took them seriously. They filed for a personal safety intervention order, which is essentially a restraining order. Surprisingly, Lewis tried to fight it in court, but he lost. For the first time in months, Celeste felt some peace. It seemed like things were calming down, but that peace wouldn't last. Just 3 months before her death, in August 2020, Lewis sent Celeste a handwritten 3-page letter. He begged her to withdraw the order. He promised he'd never bother her again. He ended the letter with a smiley face, a twisted, childish signature on a letter that violated the court's order. This time, Celeste had legal standing. She went straight to the police. Finally, something happened. At the end of August, Lewis was arrested for violating the intervention order. For the first time in over a year, it felt like the justice system was doing its job. But then, in a move that shocked everyone, Lewis was released the next day. And now he wasn't just obsessed. He was angry. In his mind, Celeste had wronged him. She had humiliated him, and he couldn't let that go. The harassment resumed almost immediately. He sent her one final chilling message. I know you rejected me. I get it. I'm like dirt to you. I get it. I know you hate me. I get it. Then, he went to a local store and purchased a hammer and a knife. And just like that, silence. For nearly 3 months, Celeste heard nothing. No messages, no sightings, no threats. It almost felt like he was gone, but the truth was far more sinister. Louis hadn't given up. He was watching, waiting, planning then. On November 14th, 2020, Celeste posted a photo on Instagram, a happy brunch date with her boyfriend Chris. A public declaration of their love. A simple, joyful moment. But for someone like Louis, it was the final trigger. The photo shattered the illusion of peace. Unbeknownst to Celeste, Louis Sacco had never stopped watching her. He was still monitoring her social media, quietly tracking her life from the shadows. And when he saw that image, Celeste smiling beside her boyfriend during a cheerful brunch, something inside him snapped. That post was all it took. By then, Louis already knew where Celeste lived. He had likely followed her home months earlier, watching her car in the driveway, studying her routine. Somehow, he'd even learned the layout of her house, possibly by obsessively piecing together visual clues from her online posts. He knew which window was hers, and on November 16th, 2020, just after 4 a.m., he struck. Armed with a hammer he had purchased months earlier, Louis climbed the fence of the Mono family home and shattered Celeste's bedroom window. The sound jolted Aggie awake. She rushed from her room, down the hall, but by the time she reached Celeste's door, it was already too late. Louis had climbed inside. What followed was a brutal, targeted attack. He stabbed Celeste at least 23 times in under 2 minutes. The violence was frenzied, deliberate, fueled by rage, delusion, and a twisted sense of entitlement. Celeste never stood a chance. After the murder, Louis fled the same way. He came back through the broken window, over the fence, disappearing into the early morning darkness. Aggie was left behind to face the unthinkable. Just hours earlier, her daughter had been alive, laughing beside her. Now, her bloodied body lay motionless in her childhood bedroom. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but it was already too late. At the same time, CCTV from a nearby house captured a car speeding away from the scene. That vehicle would later be identified as belonging to Louis Sacco. When detectives interviewed Aggie and learned about the year-long campaign of harassment and stalking, they immediately recognized the scale of the failure. But they didn't need to search for Louis. He turned himself in. Shortly after the murder, Louis walked into a local police station with a wounded hand. Calmly, he handed officers a piece of paper with Celeste's address on it and said, "She's dead. Go look. You know what happened. It's your fault." And in many ways, he was right then. He tried to provoke the officers, taunting them, seemingly hoping they'd kill him on the spot. But instead, Louis was arrested and taken into custody without further incident. Once in custody, a search of Louis's phone uncovered a deeply disturbing trove of digital evidence. Hundreds of screenshots of Celeste, her boyfriend Chris, and locations they had visited. Posts and photos pulled from her Instagram. Google searches, including directions to Chris's workplace and social profiles. Most chillingly, a floor plan of Celeste's home. To this day, it's still unclear how he obtained that. Narrator somber. The road to justice was long and excruciating between COVID delays, courtroom stalling tactics, and mental health evaluations. It took nearly 3 years for the case to finally go to trial. Louis tried everything. He fired his attorneys at the last minute, requested to represent himself, and claimed he suffered from severe mental illness. He eventually entered a guilty plea, but still tried to minimize the crime, insisting he had only stabbed Celeste twice. Not 23 times, as the medical examiner's report confirmed. Psychiatrists were called in to evaluate him. One testified that Lewis experienced hallucinations and claimed a phantom voice named Isha had urged him to act violently. But even that psychiatrist warned the court, Lewis was dangerous, highly manipulative, a serious threat to women. Behind bars, he would likely reoffend ultimately. The court determined that Lewis wasn't delusional, he was calculated. His actions weren't the product of psychosis. They were the result of entitlement, narcissism, and rage. He couldn't accept that Celeste had rejected him, and in his mind, that made her death justified. On February 29, 2024, Louis Sacco, then 39 years old, was sentenced to 36 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 30. The judge acknowledged Lewis suffered from a rare personality disorder, and that diagnosis, he said, was the only reason a life sentence wasn't imposed. The ruling stunned Celeste's family. Aggie, heartbroken, spoke publicly. She said, "The justice system showed Louis Sacco mercy. The same mercy it refused to show my daughter when she begged for help." Celeste's funeral was held in the days following her death. Over 100 people came to pay their respects to mourn the loss of a vibrant, loving young woman whose life had been cut short far too soon. Aggie grieved not just for the daughter she lost, but for the future that would never come. Celeste walking down the aisle, becoming a mother, growing older with the people she loved. Her brothers, Jaden and Alessandro, carried the weight of their sister's memory. Her infectious smile, her boundless kindness, a painful reminder of all they had lost. But Aggie was not done fighting.